Mr. Nat King Cole's Unforgettable introduces that unforgettable radio program appearing each Wednesday morning at 8:15 to 9 o'clock with unforgettable guests. And we certainly do have one this morning, and I mean that very seriously. Mr. Miller, you always recall that I try to start Viewpoint with a kudo or two for. So I just kind of reached around a little bit and kind of a little bit desperate, reaching at the flotsam and jetsam as they floated by. And I did uncover one good one. Basketball and football seem to be the primary sports in the country, country over. But there are a lot of kids in colleges and high schools, country over, who work real hard in the minor sports, such as soccer, volleyballs, etc. And we have a couple of teams at the Lincoln College volleyball team that came in a tournament recently, a big tournament. We had A team got first in the tournament, and the B team got third. So kudos to them. And while we're dishing out kudos, do you have a big raspberry, Jim, I can blow? You remember those raspberries where you blow them? Well,
there used to be a monkey on the Today Show that did that.
Well, my raspberry
of course, that's going back into history.
To the medical profession and insurance. My friend on my right, Mr. Miller, took a bad fall one day you allowed some ice to come. So I guess we hold you concomitantly responsible.
Well, me and half of Logan County, I hasten to say.
I hate ice, I'm telling you.
Well, a serious matter. Judy got hurt pretty badly, and she still hurts today. A month afterwards, she's, as I sit here, she sits to my right, she's in pain. Now, her doctor recommended an MRI, rightfully so, That was a month ago. And she still hasn't received permission, for want of a better word, to go get an MRI or even make an appointment. The insurance folks have gotten their nose in this, thanks to an immediate past president. And here she sits now, and she just represents probably thousands of people out there with in the same dilemma. But it's wrong. It's just not good. It's just not fair to the patients.
I think that's the regulation to which our president has referred, don't you? That maybe ought to be addressed.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll just go with that.
Mr. Ash is getting ready to make the drum roll, ta-da-da, ta-da, and Mrs. Busby is going to formally introduce our guest who been around a day or two with us up here, and we're sure happy to have him back. Go right ahead, Judith Kay.
Well, we are indeed fortunate to have our longtime friend Chris Miller with us. Chris is with the NOAA weather installation out at the edge of Lincoln. I'm not too good at north, south, east, west, but it's on the side there. You'll see it.
Right by the Lincoln Christian University.
It
right
surely
across the
is.
road.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Anyway, that's a NOAA installation.
Now show them how smart you are. You tell them what NOAA is.
Now the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Got it. That's
Right.
perfect.
And you thought she was just another pretty face.
I know.
And
she's
Chris
smart.
grew up north here, up to Wisconsin, and I grew up in Minnesota. And Chris, I dare say, when we were kids growing up, our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents waited for the weather forecast on the news in the evening. I mean, it was just almost mandatory that you absorb every word of that, kind of especially in the winter, to see what tomorrow might bring. Yeah. And here you are. You got so impressed with that. Now you're a famous weather guy.
Well, I don't know about the famous part, but
it could be infamous depending on how much snow he brings.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we have a little snow coming in the area today, so be careful with that.
Well, we want to give Chris a kudo, though.
Oh yeah.
Seriously,
please.
He's treated us very nicely this winter. I mean, this has been a remarkable. Here we are, early February, and we have not any real accumulation of snow at all.
No.
And the temperature, you've treated us kindly with that too.
It's above normal.
It is. It's in fact.
President
Is this
Obama
a
was
phenomenon,
right. We're warming.
so to speak? Is this a phenomenon? Not necessarily that word, but is it unusual that we've gone through a winter this far?
I would say it's unusual from the standpoint of the lack of snowfall that we've had, definitely. We've had a couple instances of ice, boo, which we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Ice is terrible. It really is one of the worst things that can hit the area, because it's, besides, as you know, the slips, trips, and falls that people have with it, the traffic accidents, but in the bad storms, you're talking about power outages and damage to trees and stuff like that. We've had a couple instances of that, but it's just been too warm. We came into the winter, everything looked like, okay, it was very warm in the fall, and then it started to get cold in December, and before Christmas we had that little bit of ice, we had a cold snap, we even got below zero a couple days, and we thought, okay, here comes winter, and we were looking at this phenomenon called La Nina, which is, last year, if you remember, it was mild winter, we had a lot of rain, there was flooding, very little snow, and this year it looked like, okay, La Nina brings us the opposite. More bouts of cold air, below zero, snow, ice, that type of thing. Well, La Nina started to show its hand in the fall and in December, and then all of a sudden, you talk about the raspberries, they went at us.
Yeah.
And it actually just dissipated. All the experts were really surprised. It just went away. And it's cool water in the Pacific Ocean, in the Eastern Pacific is what that is, and what it causes is that weather patterns are highly variable across the Midwest when we get that. So we get cold air surging down into the Midwest, and well, that went away. So when January happened, all of a sudden we got into this, well, we got warm. We had one weekend where it was well into the 60s. I was with my family down in St. Louis, down at the zoo, lower 70s, middle of January, walking around at the zoo without coats on.
Yeah.
Crazy. And then, it would drop down, and it's kind of like what we've had. Just look at this week is a perfect example of what we've had just the last 2 months. Yesterday it was raining. Yesterday morning, thunderstorms with temperatures in the 50s, close to 60. Today we've got a couple inches of snow in the forecast, and wind chills tomorrow morning expected to be about 5 degrees. But then by Saturday, Sunday,
back up.
We're back up 50, 60 degrees again. So that's just, it's been a very unusual winter.
What does this do, to have it be this mild all winter? It's kind of nice if you don't have to shovel a whole bunch of snow.
Sure.
I'll grant that, okay? Or wear 2 coats. But on the other hand, it's not all rosy. For instance, last spring, because we'd had a mild winter, my dog got fleas. Never had a dog with fleas in my life. And I went to the vet and I said, my dog has fleas. And they said, everybody's dog has fleas because they didn't freeze out.
Right.
And now that's just a mild little thing, but there are things that happen when you don't have your normal weather.
Well, and I'll tell you, Judy, you hit the nail on the head with the fleas, the insects, bugs. We haven't had enough hard freezes to get rid of the pests that are just in the fall. They burrow into the ground or hibernate, whatever they do. And that's the biggest concern is not only for our animals, but for ourselves. If we have wet weather this spring, now we're talking early mosquitoes. We're talking about the bugs, the insects that are going to damage the crops.
Yes.
And I've talked to a lot of people much smarter than me about the agricultural industry and friends of mine that farm.
But you're smarter than them about weather, so
well,
okay.
I try to be. So
don't feel bad.
Okay. But they've said, when are we going to get this hard freeze? Because we're going to have pests, and that's going to be a real problem. And you mentioned, that's one problem. The other problem I see here is an economic one. Now, there's pluses and minuses. We look at it, and economists study this kind of thing a lot, and they say, oh, mild winters. Okay, wow, the stores, they get so much more business because people can get out. They're not, they don't sell as many snow shovels and things, but they sell other things. Where it's really hurting are the guys that depend on the money.
Snow removal.
Yes, exactly.
There's a lot of, your lawn care businesses and other folks that have seasonal jobs, and whether they're hired part-time by IDOT or local, they have their own business, they're really hurting this winter. So I hate to say hopefully we'll get a couple inches of snow today, because you don't want accidents and you don't want people falling down. But at the same time, it help these guys out a little more. I really feel for them, because, they depend on that income. So the warmer weather has really hurt that.
And some of those folks invest some serious money in the snow removal equipment.
Yes.
And there it sits.
It's not cheap at all. I mean, snow removal from that standpoint, yes. Now, snow removal for the county, the city, state, they're saving some money, because they have to figure out every year, usually in the summer, how much salt are we going to buy for the upcoming winter? Because, you get closer to winter, what's going to happen? The prices are going to start surging up. And our buddies to the north up in Canada, that's where we get a lot of our salt from.
Oh, is that right?
There's a lot of salt mines up in that area. There's a few in the U.S. as well, but we...
Judy thought that came from Salt Lake City.
Oh,
I did.
And there are some out west, but there's some in Canada, too.
Well, how about that? Well, my boulevard is about the color of this woodwork.
Yeah.
So the yard service people ought to make hay.
Well, and as long as if we continue with this, and I don't see us breaking this pattern. That's the one thing about winter patterns. Once we get into them in December, we're stuck with that for the rest of the winter. And the pattern, as far as warm then cold, it's a roller coaster. We're up, we're down, we're up, we're down. We just see that continuing right through February, even into March. When we get into spring, it's interesting. Some of our longer range outlooks are pointing toward we're gonna warm up. I mean, it's been warm. We're gonna warm up even more. Get some periods of rain. Our typical spring storms, but we're starting to see a few indications, which are really kind of bothersome to me anyway, that this summer could be pretty warm. And when we see that happen, a lot of times we start, and I hate to bring up the word, but we start to see drought conditions developing. So there are a lot of folks looking at the long range saying, we're already seeing some signs. We've got moderate drought as we speak in western Illinois, from about Quincy down towards St. Louis. There's moderate drought that's extending back to our southwest across southern Missouri, Arkansas. When we see that to start to set up, unless we have a really, really wet spring down in that area, that drought's going to feed on itself and just may expand into Illinois. So we're watching that very carefully for late spring and early summer.
How long is your long-range view of weather? I mean, for the rest of my life.
Careful how you say that. You haven't had that MRI yet.
Yeah, maybe I never will. We don't know.
Well, for the rest of your life, I can't look that far into the future, because you're going to go a long time, Judy. But we have what we call the Climate Prediction Center. It's part of NOAA. Which I will say you beautifully. Most people don't know what that means, so you did a great job with that. They think it's
the guy with the ark, huh?
Exactly.
Misspelled.
Right. But our Climate Prediction Center will put outlooks out up to a year in advance. They're already showing outlooks for next winter already.
And it says?
I honestly haven't looked at those, because I'm looking at
Are you afraid?
Well, no. I'm looking at the spring and summer, right? I'm trying to focus on that at the moment. But they'll put it out there. Now, obviously, the predictability of it is very, very little.
Dicey?
It's very dicey when you get that far out, because there's so many things that can happen and develop and not develop and stuff like that. So it's something that we just, we use it to say people, use it as a planning tool, as something that we could trend this way or that way. And most of the time, there is no trend, but we are seeing the trend for warm for this summer.
Oh gosh, and it's already warm here just on a regular plain summer.
I know.
It's going to be hotter than Hades' pup.
Yeah.
We we will have warm regards from our advertisers if we give them a little bit.
I love the way you do that, you man.
Awesome segue.
Well, this station won't exist without advertisers.
That's right.
And so we have advertisers who are on Viewpoint for both of the listeners out there. So we'll seg right into acknowledging our sponsors and advertisers, and we'll get right back with Chris Miller of our local radio station, weather station. We're going to have a radio station right here. We're going to talk about what goes on out there at NOAA. Go right ahead, Mr. Rash. And right back live in the studios. Here, our guest this morning on Viewpoint is Mr. Chris Miller. One of those kind of out of sight, although it's certainly a big enough facility out there, but never given much consideration till the weather turns bad, and then he catches all kinds of hell. Mm-hmm. Noah, how many weather stations are there in the state of Illinois, like your facility here?
Right. Physically in the state of Illinois, we have 2.
Is that right?
Yep.
Only 2?
Yep. Lincoln and just outside of Chicago, near Joliet, Romeoville, is exactly where they're at.
Too.
Now, there are 3 others which, if they were any closer, they would be in Illinois practically. There's an office in Davenport, Iowa, which is just over the Mississippi. One in St. Louis, again, just across the river. Yeah. And then Paducah, which is right across the Ohio River.
I'll be darned.
And they cover the Paducah, the southern St. Louis, that Metro East area, over toward Litchfield, and then the Quad Cities. They've got Northwest Illinois, that area. So we have the biggest area within the state. We cover everything from Galesburg down toward Rushville, Jacksonville, Winchester, all the way to the Indiana border. So we've got a good, about 40% of the state.
And you have how many associates out there, Chris?
We have 23.
Total employees.
Yep, total of 23 employees at our office. At any given time, at this point now, during we don't have normal business hours in the weather business. No. We go 24/7. Yeah. But our administrative hours are roughly from 8 to 5, and during that time, we have about a dozen people in the building. But all hours of the day and night, we have at least 2, most of the time 3, until the weather gets active. Once, when I'm talking about the threat for tornadoes, severe storms, flash flooding, we'll go from those 2 guys out there to about, at the very minimum, 6 or 7, up to, there was one big event, we had 12. So we had half our staff there for one big event. Because to watch all those areas, I'll tell you, I've been out there the whole time we've been open there for over 22 years, and seen lots of different weather. When you're covering everything from Galesburg to south of Effingham, we've had snowstorms along with tornadoes on the same day in different parts. We've had probably the worst thing I can remember, we had 5 storms on the radar, all producing tornadoes at the same time in different areas of central Illinois. So it can get pretty active, that's for sure.
Generally speaking, is this part of the country, this Midwest part, as prone to weather changes as we are? Like yesterday it's 60, today there's snow.
Oh, yeah.
This whole area.
Yeah, this whole area of the Midwest, particularly down in this area. Now, you mentioned, you're from Minnesota, I'm from Wisconsin. To us, winter is, okay, you get some snow, it doesn't usually get warm, ice, it stays on the ground, that kind of thing. Here, we're at the mid-latitudes. Yes. So right around everything from, the Kansas-Nebraska border all the way across towards St. Louis, Quincy, up into central Illinois, Indianapolis. That part of the country where we live here, it changes a lot. I mean, I don't care where I go, every area around here, but even other parts of the country, wait 5 minutes and the weather will change. Literally here in central Illinois that happens. Yeah. There are very few other parts of the country where that truly happens.
Aren't you glad you got stationed here instead of someplace boring like Wisconsin and Minnesota where it's going to be winter, it's going to be winter.
Or Wichita Falls, Texas. When I was in the Air Corps down there, I saw it rain, sleet, sunshine, and hail all in the same 24-hour period.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they can get it down there, too. and some of the worst ice storms I've seen have been down in Oklahoma, northern part of Texas, so they can definitely get it there. But yeah, I'll tell you, the weather here in the Midwest, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to be a meteorologist since I was a little kid. I love the changing weather, and it's so much different than other parts of the country. And in fact, I was just talking to one of my coworkers last week who he's been at our office for a couple years now. He's one of our newer forecasters, and he worked most of his career. He grew up in California, went to school in Utah, and ended up working for the Weather Service in Flagstaff, Arizona. And then he came here. And I asked him, I said, you know, with the terrain and the mountains and everything that you have, the Grand Canyon was in the area that he forecast for. I said, was that difficult, or was it more difficult forecasting the weather here? And he said, definitely here. Definitely here in the Midwest. Out there, you get to know the terrain, and the weather is more predictable. As long as you know, a certain set of conditions, you can forecast the weather much better. Here, you've got the fronts and the temperatures and the things swinging and changing, and you just don't get that in that part of the country. So he's definitely met his challenge coming here in the Midwest. And
off air, we were talking about job opportunities, and you made the comment that in today's times, and it speaks to a lot of things and shows what just an average degree in college isn't worth a sickum as far as good income is concerned. But you mentioned that you really need to get a master's as opposed to just a baccalaureate degree. So if you think you're going to get in with any weather station anywhere.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
It's become highly competitive, but also extremely technical in the weather enterprise, as we call it. Whether it's for the National Weather Service, the TV weather, there's companies that will forecast weather for clients for a fee, and that's their business. It's become highly technical because of all the computer work that's involved with it and all the model projections. And when I came in the National Weather Service 30 years ago, we had what we call forecast models, which helps us forecast the weather. It's a computer simulation that says 12 hours, 24 hours, 7 days into the future, here's what the computer says the weather should do. We had about 4 or 5 of those that we could look at. Now we literally have dozens and dozens of these that we can look at, and little things can be tweaked and changed, and we can one forecast projection can tweak 24 to 30 different things, and you could possibly get a different solution. And the theory behind that is, what if something changes? If something changes, this is how the weather's going to respond. But if this other thing changes, that's how the weather's going to respond. And the computers are trying to give us this. And our job has turned more from looking at a few models and making the forecast to running all these computer simulations, looking at all this, averaging them out, looking at, blending them together. But the biggest part is communicating the information, because people want this information to make decisions, whether it's, what kind of seed am I going to use to plant this upcoming year?
When am I going to plant?
When am I going to plant?
Yes.
All the way to today. Do we need to have the snowplows out? Perfect example, just a very brief example. I got a call from the emergency manager in Champaign County a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I just want to let you guys know that the accurate forecast that you gave us for the ice that we were expecting that a few weekends ago, he said, that forecast saved the Champaign and Urbana, both cities, tens of thousands of dollars. And I thought, okay, how did we do that? And he said, it was because we didn't have the timing of it. We thought it was going to start earlier. You guys said it was going to start later. It started later. We didn't need the guys in the trucks putting the salt out and laying salt that didn't need to go out yet. And it saved a lot of money. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're providing. And getting back to your question, it all has to do with the education standpoint of a simple, and I call it simple, but it's the way it's turned out. A bachelor's degree today is like what a high school diploma used to be 30, 40 years ago.
Exactly.
And so because of the highly competitive nature of it and the technical nature of it, a lot of, and it's not just meteorology, it's a lot of disciplines where you need to get your master's degree.
I think that's true across the board, though.
It is.
In industry as well. You got to have the sheepskin so that they know you can be taught. And then they'll teach you.
In college, I took a semester of meteorology, and all I remember now is the Beaufort scale.
You're ahead of me.
Now, Chris, well, that has to do with wind.
Oh.
That don't ask me anymore. Chris, you brought some notes. I want to give you a chance to refer to those notes. Make sure you cover things that you wanted to cover. You're so kind to come up with us and take some time. We always appreciate that.
Sure.
And I think our listeners look forward to it, too.
Well, I'll tell you, I really appreciate you having me back, because I always say if I go out and I give a talk somewhere, or if I'm doing an interview, if somebody comes back, that tells me, okay, they liked what I said. So, but no, when I talked to a few weeks ago, when I talked to you, Judy, and you had mentioned that you thought it was interesting that something came out from NOAA, from our parent agency, that across the globe, not here in Illinois or in the United States, but across the globe, 2016 was the warmest year on record. And after getting all the information out, that's correct. It was. So I looked at it as far as everybody looks at weather locally. What is it in my backyard, or what is it in the city that I live in, or the state I live in? So last year in the state of Illinois, it actually came down as the 5th warmest year. Now, keep in mind, and this is something when we talk about climate change, we have to put it in perspective, because we don't have a lot of weather records that go back that far. Yeah. Now, we can infer, we can say, okay, the weather records we have go back to right around the time of when Abraham Lincoln was walking around this area. That's about as far back as they go.
The dinosaurs were gone then.
Yeah, exactly. And so were the glaciers, and in this area. But
we have some dinosaurs in Congress, by the way.
There's that.
But I've been asked a lot, are we seeing, what's going on with this climate change thing? Are we seeing this in our area, in the state of Illinois? From a temperature perspective, if you go back to the earliest records in the state of Illinois that we've said, yeah, these are accurate records. So we're talking about 125 years roughly, maybe a little bit more than that in some spots. We're seeing for temperatures almost like a flat line, slight increase. We're really not. We go up and down. I mean, a lot of people talk about how hot it was in the 1930s. Okay, the mid 30s, 34, 31, 36.
It was.
It was some of the hottest years, right?
I was there.
Right. We had another hot spell in the early and mid 50s. Weather got really hot, and then a lot of people remember, and I remember this myself, the mid to late 70s, we were talking about, oh, here we go into the next ice age. It was so cold, it was snowy, it was awful. That even continued into the early 80s.
Al Gore was wrong.
Yeah. And then as we get into the 90s and the 2000s, we've seen a lot more of some of the warmer temperatures. But when you average them all together and you look at a trend over that 125 or so years, it's almost a straight line, which makes sense, because when I mentioned earlier, we're in the mid-latitudes, which means the weather changes a lot here. So the changing weather kind of averages those things out. Now, if you looked at temperature records, say, in Alaska or the northern provinces of Canada, yeah, we are definitely seeing the warming. Now, there's the debate going on. How much has man contributed to this? And then, as we all know, it's become a political debate as well. I'm not going to get into the political debate, but I will say, just from looking at the science part of it, we do have these accurate records that are saying, yes, some parts of the globe are warming, some parts, like where we are, not so much. Does that mean that climate change is or isn't occurring? We're seeing it happen. It is happening in some part. Europe is really seeing this happen. Russia, those areas, they're seeing it happen. The higher latitudes, Canada, definitely seeing it happen. Here, not so much. South America, really not as much. Parts of Africa, not as much. I really don't want to say that, man is causing this 100%. You can never say that. With our planet is so big and the atmosphere is huge, to say that man is the only cause of this, we can't say that.
But common sense would say that we do have an impact. There's no question about
do
that.
we have an? We're
have to be politically.
We're definitely having an impact.
That's right.
Now, but if, let's just say, for purposes of this discussion, man was not here at all, and we had no impact whatsoever, or we were here and there was no pollution and no impact whatsoever, would we be seeing climate change? Maybe not to the extent that we're seeing now, but eventually we would. Simply because we go through these cycles. The planet goes through these cycles. We've been here before. We're going to be there again. Long after we're gone, we're going to be there again. And we know this has happened because it's the reason we have the Great Lakes. The glaciers came and they went, and they came and they went, and they scoured out the land, and then they melted.
They told me it was Paul Bunyan.
Well, for Lake Superior it was. Yeah.
You
have to go with that in Minnesota.
What a joy it is to have a guy who is so professionally, he's just a gem as far as his profession, but he's so involved in it, and it's a joy to have Chris up here, because normally you think, well, weather, who the hell wants to talk about the weather? Well, he makes it come alive for us, Judy.
Well, he does, because he's, like my dad said, he's got the book learning just down pat, but he's also got the moxie.
Well,
and that's a gift, man.
Well, thank you. And I've talked to a lot of people. I mean, I'm a city kid, okay? I grew up in Milwaukee. I didn't know the furthest, I didn't know anything about. My parents had a garden. That's what I knew about agriculture, But living here 30 years, I've wanted to learn. I've always been fascinated with agriculture and how agricultural communities thrive and what they do. I've sat in on a lot of seminars, talked to a lot of people that are in the ag industry, whether they're farmers, work for seed companies, whatever, and I'm still learning a lot about it. And it's amazing, some of the technology they have, and the reliance, obviously, that we all know they rely on weather, but some of the decisions that are being made on the longer range outlooks, those are tough calls.
Oh, they affect the Board of Trade in a big way.
Oh, big way. Huge way. Absolutely. And and we've seen it go global. Not like, I'm not talking about the climate change thing here, but I'm talking about global as far as agriculture. Sure. Because 20, 30 years ago, were they growing a whole bunch of corn down in Brazil? Not so much. No. Now, and they start slashing rainforests, which that has changed the climate in that area.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a, I've lived the West, and I've hiked and horsebacked out into the mountains a lot out there, and to be riding along here and you come to a clear-cut section, and it's just devastating to look at. Yeah. It really, you just sit there in that saddle and look around and ponder, my God, what they've done here. Yeah. And of course, it made some people a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, and you don't realize how the weather works on different scales, and so we work our way from what we call the micro scale, which is literally my backyard, your backyard, everybody's backyard, all the way to bigger, like, planetary scales, and they're all linked. They're all linked together. So changes, you mentioned, seeing the clear-cut areas. I understand that with the timber industry and everything.
Sure.
If they're replanting, that's great. But what is happening?
They didn't in the old days, though.
No, they didn't. Yeah. No. But what's happening is those changes are affecting the weather in those areas. Just like I mentioned, the 1930s, how hot it was. One of the reasons the Dust Bowl occurred was because of people that went out west into mostly Oklahoma, parts of Kansas as well, that were trying to plant the things they did in the Midwest here, corn, soybeans, out there, and you can't do that out there. The soil just wouldn't allow it, and when they started planting that way, it changed the whole landscape, and that's what created all the dust, because of their lack of soil management.
And you just can't begin to fathom how serious that was at that time. We've all seen pictures of the Dust Bowl, and what a human impact on that was. Oh, just incredible.
Yeah.
Those pictures, those folks going out west with everything tied onto a Model A Ford and break down out in the middle and the wind blowing. Oh my! It's
Yeah,
terrible.
and I'll tell you, people have asked me, especially in the drought of 2012. People ask me, are we headed for another dust bowl? Because here in this area, we went 18 months, very dry, in drought conditions, severe drought conditions for 18 months. I said, honestly, with the state of agriculture these days, I don't think we'll ever see another dust bowl. Now, that's not to say we're ever going to get the hot temperatures.
Now.
We're farming differently.
Right.
We're farming much differently, and we have the hybrids that can still grow in the drought conditions or the very dry conditions. But that's why I don't think we'll ever see that again. Now, that's not to say we'll never see drought and never see hot temperatures, but we will. And here in the Midwest, thankfully, our droughts typically don't last very long. Even the worst ones, you think back to 1988, think back to 2012, which was another really bad one. Those were maybe 2 years or so in length, which seems like a long time, but think about what they deal with in California when they're talking 6 years, 8 years, 10 years. So fortunately, again, that is the beauty of our weather because it changes so much. And
speaking of California, there were pictures on the news again today about the mudslides. Is that a relatively recent phenomenon? Does Mother Nature want California to be pushed into the ocean?
Well, I'll tell you, that's actually kind of the right word, maybe a relic, whatever, of the, it's a byproduct of the drought that they've had. The drought gets so bad that the vegetation on the hillsides, it dies. And then all of a sudden, California breaks its droughts the way they have to break their droughts. Again, a whole ton of rain all at once over a period of months. But when all that rain happens, there's no vegetation left to stop the flow or what we call the percolation, the water going into the soil, and it just runs down and it just grabs big chunks of the dirt, which now is mud, and off it comes. And so it's a very common thing out west where they get into these extended droughts. Once they get the rain, mudslides are going to follow, and that's just the way. It's almost nature's way of saying, out in this area, I don't think the land out here was really meant to be settled by millions and millions and millions of people.
Indians didn't think so either.
No.
Chris.
They were smart.
I want to digress just a bit because I want you and I to know that how lucky we are to be in the presence of such luminaries, Mrs. Busby and Mr. Ash. For instance, 17 years ago I came across an article, and it says here, yes, it was my first personal encounter with a media celebrity, and the writer is talking about Mrs. Busby.
That could be pushing it.
And in this same publication, there appears a picture of a fellow who's now a station manager, producer, engineer, janitor, etc. And the fellow's wearing a Dr. Seuss hat.
Yep.
In 1999, he was reading Dr. Seuss on the radio. Northwest School. So I just want you to know that you are in significant company here, Mr. Miller. So you can go home and tell your mom and your daddy.
Jim and I really go back a very long ways, don't we, Jim?
Yes, Mrs. Busby first went on the air in 1969. And she was a mere slip of a lady then.
I was 4.
Well, I'm older than you are.
And so I dug up this piece of momentous history, and with it I'll present it to Mrs. Busby so she can save that for her children or her great-grandchildren.
Oh my gosh, all of which I have at this point.
This was a production, a publication called Our Times, which you may remember, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I sure do.
And Nancy Gilbo did a really good job of writing for that. And
yes, she did
a lot of interviewing and went around the community and dug up stories. Mm-hmm. And that came to me through the auspices of Richard and Mary Ellen Martin, so I thought you'd enjoy that. Chris,
I started out, I got to say this for people who are my age. I started out with Earl Lehman. You remember him, Jim? He was just the nicest man. Not that you're not, sweetie. He was a lovely man. People just really fawned over him.
And a pro.
Oh, my word, I hope to tell you.
Consummate pro.
Yeah, he was lovely.
So we've morphed from WPRC out there on the edge of town, which was next to the state school. That's what we called it in those days. Politically correct today, but incorrect, but nonetheless. Chris, we've appreciated your time up here. We always like to, Judy and I look forward to it. There's a couple times a year at least to kind of keep us going here. Real quickly, I want to ask this question. People see the weather balloons go up. They go up twice a day, do they?
They go up twice a day. This time of the year, we do them at 5 in the morning and 5 in the evening. And when we switch to daylight time, we also switch, so we do it at 6.
Oh, you do? Yes. Now, what is real quickly, what is the furthest one that has gone as far as you know? Because these have little tags on them so they can be returned.
Right. And the furthest one that we've heard, Northwest Ohio.
That's interesting.
From Central Illinois, from our office.
Hey, that's out of town, man.
Yeah, that's a long ways away.
You betcha.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate very much. And my last quote about weather is, if you want to see the sunshine, you have to weather the storm. And that applies to a lot of folks. So we've had a lot of storms.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So thank you, Chris Miller, for being with us, and we look forward to it again.
Well, you're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.